Good evening. I'm Robert Costa. This week nears a close with both parties at intriguing crossroads, less than 100 days before the midterm elections. For Democrats, it's a moment of reflection and potential recalibration. After months of anxiety and alarm over how the economy and inflation could dominate the campaign season, abortion rights are now front and center, following Tuesday's surprise vote in Kansas, where more than 60% of primary voters signaled they want to maintain abortion rights in that ruby red state. How might this turn of events change Democrats' strategy in the coming weeks? Do they lean into this issue and hope for a voting surge? And could that, plus a possible climate and tax deal in the Senate, give President Joe Biden and the White House a political boost? Meanwhile, Republicans still feel the wind at their back, at least when they look at most polls. But they're facing lingering questions about who they are and whom voters should see as their leader. Earlier today, CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, opened its latest gathering, this time in Dallas, Texas. The confab is a reminder of the dynamics inside the GOP. While congressional Republican leaders are eager to focus on inflation and the president, many activists are far more hardline. The political movement of nationalism, here and abroad, continues to gain traction, fueled by anger toward global institutions and established political leaders. In Dallas, CPAC, Texas will today welcome Viktor Orban, the hardline nationalist prime minister of Hungary. He spoke earlier today. Then former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon will speak on Friday. And finally, former President Donald Trump on Saturday. Joining us to open their notebooks and discuss what's next are two top reporters, Scott MacFarlane and Trevor Hunnicutt. Scott is a CBS News congressional correspondent, and Trevor is a White House correspondent for Reuters. Good to have you both here. Scott, let's begin with the politics of the economy. Democrats remain hopeful they can pass this climate and spending bill in the coming weeks. But as your reporting shows, it's not a done deal. Give us a behind-the-scenes glimpse, Scott, into where that whole discussion and negotiation stands.
Yeah, Bob, I spent a chunk of the day with Joe Manchin, who is usually the pivotal player when everything's hanging in the balance. But, of course, he cut the deal last week with Senator Schumer to get this ball rolling down the hill. And now they're waiting on Senator Sinema of Arizona, who has been expert at avoiding reporters over the past few days, and she continues that winning streak tonight. Senator Manchin says they're going to, in his words, land this plane. He says, I can't tell you exactly when, but it's going to land. They're starting the clock, they're starting the procedure over the weekend, which means they're losing their weekend, which sets the table for possible final passage early next week. But it's still that holdout Senator Sinema, and whatever issues she's pushing back on. The latest reporting we have is it's over one of the tax provisions, and there are multiple provisions in this bill, one involving investment funds. It's part of the revenue generation that'll be used to pay for the new programs and pay down the national debt a bit. Getting Senator Sinema on board may require some type of give, some type of yielding. We'll see how that plays out over the weekend, but it appears they have all but one of the votes they need, and Senator Manchin is expressing optimism they'll get the last one.
Trevor, maybe it takes a little bit of give in the negotiation. Maybe it takes a call from President Biden. Traditional way deals are closed on Capitol Hill. What is the White House doing right now to push this, to finalize this deal? Can the president do anything besides use the bully pulpit at this point?
Well, the White House has been cognizant that when they've gotten involved in congressional negotiations in the past, and including with Manchin and Sinema, that it hasn't been always that effective, that it hasn't always been effective for them to be publicly involved. And that they feel like their best role is kind of in a support role, letting the negotiations play out. And then if there's a problem or a place where they feel like Biden can weigh in publicly and help, then he will. But most of what they're doing is on the staff level, and it's in the background, and intentionally so. And then you could see Biden get involved personally in these negotiations. But even that they would try to keep a tight lid on that and make sure that that was a one-on-one call with Senator Sinema or Senator Schumer, so that they can strategize privately and not have that become a public issue.
Trevor, when you're talking on background with people close to the White House, close to the president, what's their real view of Senator Sinema here? Do they believe she wants to get to yes or she wants to get to no?
Sure. Yeah. So the White House is actually cautiously optimistic about Senator Sinema. They think that there's a lot in here that she can sell to her constituents. Even though she doesn't have a race immediately, she has obviously pressures back in Arizona, so there is a sense that there's a lot in this bill that is frankly designed by her and something that she supports in terms of the climate provisions, in terms of prescription drug care, that are all going to be really beneficial for her in an electoral sense. And so they think that is kind of the motivation that will get her on board, even though she doesn't like some of the tax provisions.
Scott, the fallout from the Capitol attack, which, of course, you've been closely covering, it continues to hover over this election season as well. And FBI Director Chris Wray, he testified before the Senate earlier today. What more from the FBI or the Justice Department could bring that story back into the spotlight politically?
He was asked, Director Wray was, right at the beginning of that Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, Bob, about the outstanding arrests, the ones that haven't been made yet. The Justice Department has said in so many words there will be more arrests. In fact, they estimate 300 to 400 more arrests, in addition to the 850 or so already been made. Director Wray was asked, why has it taken so long? Why are we now 19 months later, we're still trying to find 350 people? And the director said, partly because some of the people in the mob that day were distinctively, uniquely good at masking their identities and almost came to the Capitol, perhaps with that motivation. But also, and this is what was most striking, Bob, he said there are the bigger conspiracy cases that take more time to investigate, to produce.
Scott, I want to dig into that real quick with you. The conspiracy side of this, that investigation, do you expect the DOJ to move on this before the election on the conspiracy front if they believe someone from the Trump White House was implicated in the Capitol attack in some way, or do they wait until after the midterm elections?
And there is a policy that has been reinforced over recent months through reporting that the Justice Department treads lightly in election years on any issue or any case that has a nexus with politics or elected officials. Let's put that aside. There's a different complication, Bob, between now and Election Day. The biggest conspiracy cases so far, the accused seditious conspirators, the Oath Keepers, they go on trial this fall. Their trial dates range from September to November, the very weeks before the midterm elections. It's possible the Justice Department holds off on charging new seditious conspiracy defendants, no matter what their position or rank, until those trials are over, so as not to interfere with or complicate the trials. The Justice Department wants to get those trials done. They don't want them delayed any longer, so that might be a factor I think not enough people are talking about.
It's so interesting. We're watching to see if former President Trump gets in early into 2024. Where does Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, go with possibly moving on the former president in terms of prosecution or not? We're watching Georgia. We're watching New York. But, Trevor, there's also foreign policy. We have John Kirby from the White House coming up in a little bit. You've been tracking the Biden White House and foreign policy in recent weeks. When they look at Ukraine and Taiwan, do they see these issues as playing into the midterm conversation in any way?
Potentially. I mean, we've got an escalation in obviously around Taiwan, and the memories are long at this White House. They remember that the issue that kind of set off the big downward spiral in President Joe Biden's approval ratings was the Afghanistan withdrawal, and mishandling a foreign policy crisis can cause deeper concerns among voters about the fitness of the commander-in-chief. And so that's always in the back of their minds when they have a flashpoint like this. Now, Taiwan has been a pretty bipartisan issue, as has the response to the Russian war in Ukraine. But, we have an election coming up. And so there's always in the back of, certainly the White House's mind is a sense of, OK, well, when does that consensus collapse, and can we count on a House controlled by Republicans to give the same level of financial support to our efforts in Ukraine, and can we count on the same level of support for our strategy for China, or will it become a political issue? So it hasn't yet, but there's a concern that it might become an issue.
In the final few minutes here, I want to start with Trevor, then Scott. I would love to have you jump in to come back to the point from the beginning. Kansas, Tuesday, such an interesting moment politically now that abortion rights are clearly going to be part of the midterm conversation in a bigger way. Trevor, inside the White House a few days later, how is this changing their framing, their thinking of the coming election campaign?
Well, they always knew that much as they wanted to talk about the accomplishments of this administration, that the conversation was going to be steered back to things that are not accomplishments of this administration. In particular, the inflation spiral and the loss of the Roe v. Wade abortion rights in this country, and that those are going to be two tricky issues for them. I think there's some optimism now coming out of Kansas that that's an issue that they can win on, and that they want to put Vice President Harris out in front of as a public figure, and as a galvanizing force to get people to come to the polls. And inflation continues to be a tricky topic for them, but you'll continue to hear them talking about gas prices, especially if they're coming down right into Election Day.
And Vice President Kamala Harris was in Boston today doing just that, talking about abortion rights. Scott, wrap us up here. What about on Capitol Hill? How does Kansas change their calculation?
I talked to sources in the House side and the Senate side. The Senate side's particularly interesting right now, Bob. Mark Kelly, one of those frontline incumbents up for re-election, has a new ad out just today, hitting his new Republican opponent on abortion issues. I'm told that the DSCC, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, has circled all these states saying abortion rights are an issue. But look at New Hampshire in particular. That's the one where, again, they have a frontline incumbent, where abortion rights poll so well, where abortion rights are so protected and have been for so long. They really think, at least the outside sources think, the DSCC can really mobilize there in that New Hampshire race.
Scott MacFarlane and Trevor Hunnicutt, appreciate your reporting and your time. Thank you.